Sometimes we have to go to the hospital. When we go to the hospital, we're concerned about our physical and mental problems, but we also need God. We need a chance to let God speak to us. Stay tuned. I am delighted to be with you today because we're talking about something that we all experience, well, most of us experience, and that's the reality of being in a hospital. All of a sudden, something happens, and whether it's an operation or whether it's just some sickness that needs to be handled, we find ourselves in a hospital. And when we're in a hospital, kind of inevitably, there's going to be someone coming by and saying hello, and that person is probably a chaplain who's going to perhaps give us a dimension of our faith that we hadn't thought about before. Father Chris, God bless you. Thank you very much for coming and being with us. You're a person who's given your whole life as a priest to serving people in hospitals, people that are sick, people that are suffering. And I'd like to know a little bit about that, but before that, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Jesus.
An experience of Jesus has been evolving, like so many. As a child, my father died when I was very young. My mother was one of those wonderful examples of faith. And I grew up in a parish community where the sisters told a lot of stories. And it was those stories that as a third grader, I made that decision I wanted to be a priest.
Third grade.
In third grade. And it hasn't wavered at all. And so I entered the seminary in high school. I'm a lifer. I have 12 years in the seminary. And in that, I would say my experience of Jesus moved from kind of an intellectual understanding of what doctrine and Scripture was about. And then I had some very strong experiences with charismatic renewal. St. Paul speaks about praying unceasingly. And in fact, it so enthralled me that I actually did my master's thesis on that. And that sense that Jesus is connected with every thought and every breath and every movement I have. And that has framed my whole perspective of peace and justice, my pastoral care to the sick, as well as my own struggles in life with heart disease and open heart surgery.
Yourself?
Myself. I had 4 bypass heart surgery. Wow. And when you are told by that doctor, would you sign this paper, and an important part of that paper says you might die.
Yes.
And I want to release you from responsibility if I were to die. And at a certain moment there, it's real clear that life and death is fragile. And I come from a family with history with cholesterol problems. I now have some allergy problems. And so I know for me, as I experience each heartbeat and each breath as precious, I also know that each heartbeat and each breath, Christ and God is with me. And so it's become that sense of praying at every second and every moment. Even right here, I experience the presence of Christ breathing with me and in my heartbeat. And I want to try to maximize that and internalize that, and then also express that, especially as a preacher. How do I take that experience that I have and to connect it with other people's stories and experiences?
So there's a lot of appreciation of everything that happens in your life and relating that to the God who is loving you.
Correct.
There's also this passion to be able to now let this kind of come out. It isn't just a matter of feeling good or feeling loved by God, but something has to happen that moves you to want others to be able to have that experience too.
And to from my perspective, to also, for me not only to bring and share Christ, but to see the God in each person, and to be humble enough And as we say about chaplaincy, to be a story catcher, to not be there to force God on anyone, but to really see the God and lift up the God that's already there in that person, whatever their spiritual path.
To be enriched by that. Yeah.
Correct.
Your job, though, full-time job, if you will, is roaming the corridors of hospitals, going into rooms and talking to people that are sick, people that are suffering. I've got to tell you that I have a deep admiration for that because of the exhaustion in my experience of doing that for 6 months intensely, and coming home every night totally drained because of the diversity of what you have to face. You might go into one room and they have an ingrown toenail, and you've got to empathize with that ingrown toenail. You walk out and you go to the next room, and the woman has just been told that she has stage 4 cancer. She has 5 kids that are under the age of 7, and how do you deal with that? Shifting your gears.
Correct.
God bless you for doing that. You know?
Well, I've been doing it for 21 years, and each day is so profound and so filled with blessings that I continue to enjoy being a part of this ministry. For me, it's also important that I don't do this alone. So I'm very clear about the fact that every time I go into the room, I'm representing God, but also a community of faith and people who support and are praying. So I really feel like it's not just me. But we do, chaplains walk into abnormal moments in people's lives.
Yes. Trauma.
Trauma moment. We're a Trauma 1 hospital. So we walk in a moment where someone themselves are feeling depressed because they failed at suicide. And not only are they injured, but now we're dealing with spiritual and emotional issues of, from their perspective, what they wanted to do was not successful. For our perspective, we're grateful that they didn't succeed. And now we try to journey with them and hear what led them to that place of depression. And
one of the things I find important to remember is that as a priest, for example, on a weekend, I'm going to go to a parish and I'm going to be celebrating Mass with people, and there'll be a choir there, and there'll be Catholics that'll be standing, they might even be standing in the aisle. But they're all choosing to be there, and they're all church people. You come to a lot of people who ain't going to church,
right,
and are in the midst of these traumas that are going on. I'm speaking again of admiration. How do you approach someone who is not a church person and yet is going through these terrible problems?
True. I work with a lot of wonderful people, and in the course of working with people around the country who do chaplaincy, especially from an interfaith perspective and a non-faith perspective, 4 issues continue to come up among those who are ill. What is the question of meaning in their life? The question of hope in their life.
Meaning, hope.
Where do they have relationships in their life?
Who are the people they live with and relate to?
And where is there a need for peace or reconciliation? And very often...
It's a little bit comprehensive, isn't it?
It is. And you can use that language and not talk about faith or God or Allah
going to church and...
Yes, all that. And so those 4 questions actually are what we chart in the hospital based on those 4 questions. Now, for some people, they're very strong in their faith, whatever that faith.
Sure.
And for other people, have a faith, but they're not very strong, and now their trauma or their illness is raising those questions of what do I believe now, even though I was raised as a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian, and
suddenly
now
in the context of death,
correct,
or perhaps a complete reversal of the direction of their lives,
correct,
a real reorientation. We're going to come back in just a moment, and I want to know, just personally, how do you approach these people, and what gift has God given you to be able to continue to do this for over 20 years? I think that this might even be helpful for us as we deal with people in our own lives that are suffering. Stay tuned. Thank you very much for watching the program. Thank you also for sending in your donations to allow us to continue. It's so very vital. I'd like to come back to you after you've sent your donation by giving you a gift. It's a gift that is written by a friend of mine, Father Marty Padovani, a member of my community, Divine Word Missionaries. The title of the book is Healing Wounded Emotions. Father Marty is a counselor, and he's going to come to you as you read this book with deep insights into some of the topics that are really at the heart of the pain and struggle that you're going with. Pain and struggle with emotions. There are some topics here that I know you'll relate to. Take, for example, anger. How do we deal with anger? Anger with other people, anger with ourselves, even anger with God. Father Marty is going to open some doors and bring you the peace that you're looking for. What about forgiveness? Forgiveness of someone that's hurt us, or even forgiveness of ourselves. Then there's the other overriding problem of emotion that we experience time and time again in our world today. And that's the problem of depression. How many people have I run into that are just overwhelmed with this shadow of depression in their life, and they don't know how to get out? Father Marty, with the wisdom and prayer that he gives, is going to help you in a rich way. So, as you reach out and try to help our ministry and allow us to continue, please ask for a copy of this book, Healing Wounded Emotions by Father Marty Padovani. And together, may we bring about the peace and the power of Christ. Chris, I want to ask you a personal question and an acknowledgement perhaps of the gifts that God has given you. But what in heaven's name do you do with the great diversity of situations? How do you enter into people's lives in a way that is the presence of Christ?
I first of all try to empty myself. So when I walk into the room, I want to just be a vehicle to what's happening in that circumstance. Part of the CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education training, teaches us how to listen attentively and to let go of any of our expectation. But along with that, as I said earlier, my sense of each breath and each heartbeat is the presence of God. I really do believe when I walk into a room, and a lot of my patients are Spanish speaking, a lot of my patients are dealing with economic struggles, that how can I be attentive to what their concerns might be? And so, as you said earlier, the concern might be getting notice of a 4th stage cancer diagnosis, but the real issue for them today might be who's taking care of my 2 cats that are the center of my life. So how do I be attentive to that which is important to that person? For many people, the gift of chaplaincy is it's the first time that they've ever had a one-on-one interaction with a religious person.
Yes, yes.
And with undivided attention, who comes and sits down with them and says, so what's important in your life today?
Yeah.
So they might be active in their church and 500 people or 1,000 people, and God is important to them, but for them to sit down and for someone to say, so what is important in your life? And for them to talk about a divorce, or a child that's left the church or is struggling with unemployment, for us to give them that time, and then to also say at the end, is there something here that is this a moment we'd like to bring into prayer? And to acknowledge that divine presence. And if they're from a faith tradition that's different, how might we do that and pray that? And in fact, I have an app on my phone that walks me through various faith traditions, prayer suggestions, so that I'm in tune with their language. And as an interfaith chaplain, and especially as a Christian person, I trust that Jesus is with everything that I'm doing, but I don't need to use his name in all things, because his presence is beyond that. And so how I pray with people and how they want to pray is is really led by them. Sometimes I'm an advocate, so maybe they would rather not pray with me for various reasons, but do I get someone who speaks their language, or do I get a rabbi or an imam or someone from their particular Christian walk? So I become that advocate to make that happen if they would like that to happen. And very often, just by offering that, they'll often say, "Oh no, you'll do. I'll pray with you."
Yes.
And that's a good thing. And in our particular hospital, since 1855, there's been that sense that those who come to a public general hospital, who are often not given all the adequate items of the medical community, will also have a spiritual presence that journeys with them.
You oftentimes are going to run into people who really don't believe, who don't have faith, who believe that only this life is what exists. How do you respond to that? This is the diverse beyond a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Muslim, or a Jew. How do you deal with the atheist or well, let's don't go into the heavy agnostic.
I go back to those 4 values.
Do that again, would you?
And so I would walk with them and ask, what brings you hope? What brings you meaning? Who are in your life? Who's the relationship in your life? And where is there a need for reconciliation? And I find that going in that direction allows them to talk about their story and allows them to talk about their values. And I find that especially my colleagues that are doctors and nurses, and then especially in my work around peace and justice, a lot of my colleagues that have no particular faith, that their lives are so rich with giving and service, kindness and charity, and they want to serve the most vulnerable, that sometimes we with official church faith,
Amen.
We want to do this, but these folks
yeah.
are doing it in a passionate way.
Way beyond the confines.
There's several lawyers that I work with folks on death row. These are people that have been completely thrown away from society, and people want to kill them. And these people spend decades not only listening to these people's stories, but fighting for the chance that they might not be killed. These people have a depth of spirituality that I need to learn from and affirm and help evoke and bring to their attention sometime, especially when they're dealing with their own mortality or with the mortality of someone very close to them.
But what's so beautiful is you are known as a Jesus person.
Correct.
And if you are going to come with all of those great qualities of those 4 things, you're going to represent a beautiful, beautiful challenge to them of what it means to be an evangelist, what it means to be an offerer of the message of Christ. Even if perhaps they're firm in their, I don't want anything to do with this, your presence and your spirit is the message that can change their lives.
That is my hope and prayer every day.
Now, you mentioned a couple things about the death penalty, and you mentioned social justice. This is something that's very close to your heart also. Tell me a little bit about that and why is that so important?
I've always believed that the gospel demands of me to do the Jesus, to be the Jesus. And in that context over the years, circumstances in my life have led me to encounter injustices, whether it be about nuclear weapons. When I was a young priest, I was invited to go to the nuclear test site outside of Las Vegas, and these couples were getting arrested because they wanted the world to be safe for their children. And as a young celibate priest, it was like, wow, what am I doing to make this belief of Jesus concrete in this world? And since then, it's unpackaged. As a chaplain at the county hospital, so many of our patients come to us as victims of violence or perpetrators of violence as inmates.
Many refugees.
Many refugees from war-torn countries. And women that have been victims of abuse and violence. And so for me, the connection between my personal understanding of Jesus' love and compassion with the justice principles of our faith community as well as the interfaith world demands of me to make those links, to connect the dots, and to realize that just on healthcare, that everyone has a right, as our church says, to be cared for in a health care place. But equally, on an ethical level, I do a lot of work with our ethics committee, is that we live at a time where we can do a lot of medical things, but is that what God wants us to do? Is the continuation of a body connected to machines really God's will? Or are we blessed with that? And as someone who was on life support with open heart surgery, I'm grateful those mechanisms were in place. But when I get to a place...
What's the balance? What's the balance?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and I will often say to families, one, what are we fearing about death? Do we believe in the resurrection? If I do believe in the resurrection as a Christian, then there's a lot more to come after this. And equally, I will often ask, 200 years ago, and as I said, part of my hobby is my family genealogy. 200 years ago, when your family and my family came down with the same illness, what did they do? If Mom walked outside the church and stumbled and hit her head, 200 years ago, we would all gather around her. We would pray for her. We might bring some water. We might use some remedy, but Mom would probably die right there. We wouldn't take her in and connect her to machine. And so often our ethical questions about end of life have to do with where do we believe in God in this? Where is our hope?
Yes.
And can we say this is an appropriate moment to remove some mechanism, or at least not to do aggressive surgeries?
Or extreme unnecessary things, perhaps.
And that's the moment when we as family, faith family, gather. We do our wonderful rituals. Our tradition has wonderful rituals, the litany of saints, the prayers around the dying, so that a person is not alone, both spiritually and as a family, is so important. It's so rich. And I feel so blessed to be able to be a part of that every day and to train new chaplains to do that too. So a lot of my work nowadays is helping train chaplains that come to our place and literally go throughout the world.
It's very important that you share in this ministry by offering your prayers and also by offering your donations to allow us to continue. We need your help. And as a sign of my support of you for your support, I'd like to send you a copy of this book by a friend of mine, Father Marty Padovani, a Divine Word missionary. The title of the book is Healing Wounded Emotions. This book is going to touch such topics as how do you deal with anger? How do you deal with forgiving others? How do you deal with forgiving self? And oh my, one of the big important topics, how do we deal with depression in our life? Father Marty is going to give you a perspective of a Christian who has been able to touch the heart of a solution and true healing. Remember, ask for the book, Healing Wounded Emotions. Father Chris, one of the big challenges that's facing us today is the challenge of assisted suicide, and there's legislation that's going on about that. Would you comment about that? Someone really feels that their life has ended. Why not end it with dignity rather than go on perhaps into an extended time of suffering?
I think the basic principle from a faith perspective is thou shalt not kill. And so that's always a struggle about taking another person's life, let alone my own life. I know as a chaplain, I have found very few people who want to kill themselves. Very often, the illness, especially long-term chronic illness, is so overwhelming that they can lose hope. And so I think as a faith community, we need to be present to them, to encourage and lift up, even in those painful last moments, hope, and to know that God is in the midst of that. And on the other side of that, I think we need to be about better pain management, and we need to be about not doing aggressive end-of-life procedures. And so I think we're in this very difficult place here,
That balance again.
where very specific individuals who are not part of what normally happens in hospital, who have had chronic illnesses that are, as far as we know, terminal, they get to that point of hopelessness and frustration. And I think what the bishops are asking us to do is to say no to giving them the tools, the pills, to kill themselves. But equally, I would say the burden is on us as society and as people of faith to create that place where a person in that place would get appropriate medical and pain management, but equally a supportive faith and spiritual community that would lift them up and give them a peaceful or a good death, as some people would call it.
And bottom line is getting over our fear of entering into hospitals as people who want to just come and do what you said without expectations or whatnot, to be present, to pray, and to be ministers to people in hospitals. You do a great job, but there's maybe 600 beds in some of the hospitals, and there's a lot of need for people from the parish to come and do their work, to bring that hope, especially when things are tough.
True.
We have got wonderful people, and I promise to pray for them.
Okay.
Just examples of this is Sonia from Texas. She wants to get back to the Lord. Sandy from Washington. Help me with my faith. Here are the two things coming with this. Katie from Colorado, separated from her husband, very lonely and very depressed. And Sherry from Illinois, grateful to God, who's brought healing and blessing into her life. Let's pray. Lord, we believe that you care for people, and we've been very touched by Father Chris and what he's been able to say about the tender love that he brings, and we know that it's you that's bringing that tender love and healing. Come into each of these people's lives, change them, bring about the wholeness that only you can give in their heads, their hearts, and especially their souls. And may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.